Marcus stumbled into his chambers, slamming the door shut behind him. His breathing was ragged and uneven, his chest heaving, as if his heart were a caged bird desperately seeking escape. His eyes fell to his trembling hands, still slick with Seth's blood.
"What have I done? What have ye done?"
Without hesitation, he darted to the corner of the room, where a marble pedestal held a basin of water. The cold water bit at his skin as he plunged his hands into it, scrubbing furiously. No matter how hard he scrubbed, the crimson stains seemed to linger, the water swirling into a pale red. A mournful wail echoed down the corridor outside his chambers, piercing the silence like a blade. Marcus froze, his wet hands dripping onto the floor. The sound struck him to his core. It was his mother's voice, raw with anguish. He lowered his head. He knew that her grief was his doing. Henry had barely closed his eyes all night. The sound of his wife's anguished cries had reverberated through the halls, piercing the thick stone walls and unsettling every soul within the castle. Guests murmured nervously in the halls, their hushed speculation interrupted only by the harried explanations offered by the king's advisers and squires. Even the glow of the torches seemed dimmer, shadows lurking in every corner like unwelcome reminders of the night's events. In a private chamber, Henry sat behind an oak desk, his shoulders stiff. His piercing gaze flicked over the small assembly before him, a trembling stable boy gripping his cap, the pale dungeon guard, Duke Mercer Alexander, and his solemn-faced youngest son, and finally Marcus, his son, who stood rigid and hollow-eyed. "You must answer the king's question, boy," Cartanin barked at the stable hand, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. The boy swallowed hard, his knuckles white, as he twisted the fabric of his cap. I am sorry, your grace," he stammered, his voice barely audible. Henry leaned forward, his tone softer, but no less commanding. "You are not in trouble. Speak plainly. What did you see?" The boy's gaze darted nervously between the king and Cartanin. "It was late, your grace. My master had retired for the night, and I dozed off in the stables." His words tumbled out in a rush. "I know I shouldn't have, and I swear it will not happen again." "Tell the king what happened when you woke," Cartanin snapped, his patience clearly fraying. The boy flinched, but obeyed. "I woke to the sound of footsteps. Lord Carver Williamson was there. He'd saddled his horse himself and rode out in a hurry. I did not even have time to offer my help." Henry's eyes narrowed, his expression inscrutable, as he exchanged a brief look with Cartanin. The adviser gave a slight nod before addressing the boy. "You may go." The boy's relief was palpable as he gave a jerky bow and hurried from the room, his footsteps echoing faintly down the corridor. Henry turned his attention to the dungeon guard. "Gromley, you were keeping the dungeon gate last night. Tell me what happened." The man stepped forward and cleared his throat nervously. "Your grace, I have failed you. I liked the stable hand, fell asleep last night, and I wish to resign my post as a guard in your dungeons." The king's brow furrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his face as he glanced at Cartanin. "I appreciate your honesty, Gromley. I will accept your resignation. But first, you must tell me everything." Gromley nodded stiffly, his eyes darting briefly to Marcus and Nimrod. "I do not know how the prince and his companions got in, your grace, but I woke to the sound of prisoners shouting. When I checked the cells, I found the seer dead." His voice cracked on the last word. "That's when I alerted Sir Malcolm and Sir Cartanin." Henry's jaw tightened, his gaze boring into the guard. "Thank you, Gromley. You will remain in your post for now. You may take your leave." Gromley blinked, visibly startled by the reprieve, before bowing deeply. "Thank you, your grace." He left the room with an awkward grin, the door creaking shut behind him. Henry's attention shifted to Nimrod and Marcus, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "Now, which of you will explain what happened?" Duke Mercer stepped forward, his tone measured, but anxious. "Your grace, my son has already confessed his involvement to me. He says—" Henry held up a hand, silencing him. "I need to hear it from them directly." The Duke nodded and stepped back, his eyes filled with concern as he glanced at his son. "Marcus." Henry's voice was quieter now, though it still carried the weight of authority. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his head bowed. "I am sorry," he murmured. "Sorry for what?" "Speak." Henry leaned forward, his tone hardening. "I am sorry, father," Marcus repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was Carver," Nimrod interjected, his voice steady and clear. Henry's sharp gaze snapped to him. "Go on." "It was Carver's idea to visit the seer after the celebrations. Marcus said he did not want to take us, but Carver insisted. Marcus relented and led us down to the dungeon. There, Carver stole the keys from the guard and unlocked the dungeon gate. Once inside, he demanded the seer tell us a sight." Henry's lips pressed into a thin line as he listened, his hands tightening into fists on the desk. He looked at his son, who seemed to grow smaller with every word from Nimrod. "The seer. He was strange, your grace. His words were wild, nonsensical. Then he grew violent, lunging at us like a beast. Carver panicked and drove his dagger into the seer's neck." Henry inhaled deeply, his jaw clenching as he processed the account. "And that is all?" "Yes, your grace," Nimrod replied firmly. The king turned his attention back to his son, his voice low. "Marcus?" The prince raised his head, his bloodshot eyes shimmering with exhaustion. "That is all." The mid-morning chill of Garhana clung to Elowyn like a jealous phantom, biting through the layers of her gown. She descended the creaking wooden steps leading to the royal docks, her every step measured against the frosty planks. Around her, the dock bustled with life. Merchants bartered loudly over crates of wares, sailors hauled heavy cargo onto weathered ships, and port officials scrawled notes in ledgers with rapid efficiency. The air was thick with the mingling scents of salt water, wood smoke, and the tang of fish. Elowyn walked closely with her ladies, and her sister, Lana, their cloaks drawn tightly around their frames. At the forefront, Duke Saber strode with purpose, his cape billowing slightly in the brisk sea breeze as he led the way to his grand ship, the Changeling. "Husband," Elowyn called, her voice carrying over the din of the docks. "Pray slow your steps. There is no need to rush." The Duke paused on the steps, though his gaze remained fixed ahead. "Apologies, my dear," he replied, his tone absent, as if his mind were already aboard the ship. Elowyn exchanged a knowing smile with Lana as they caught up to him. Together, they stepped onto the main dock, where the ship loomed in the distance, its dark hull reflecting the golden light of the sun. "She is magnificent," Elowyn whispered as she slipped her arm into the Duke's, her eyes wide with admiration. Duke Saber allowed himself a rare smile, pride glinting in his eyes. In the morning light, the Changeling was a marvel, her polished rails gleaming, and her sails furled neatly against her towering masts. Behind them, however, Lana gazed at the ship with an air of unease, her admiration muted by a flicker of apprehension. "Sisters," a familiar voice called from behind them, "are you truly trying to sneak away without saying your goodbyes?" Turning, they saw Prince Jamison descending the staircase, with King Henry, Jack, Karin, and Marcus following in his wake. "Oh, brother," Elowyn sighed, her smile softening. You know we could never manage such a thing." Jamison pulled both sisters into a firm embrace, his lips brushing their foreheads with a tender kiss that momentarily eased the chill in the air. "We will miss you both terribly," he murmured, stepping back with a wistful smile. "Thank you, brother," Lana replied softly, her voice barely above the whisper of the waves lapping at the dock. Marcus approached them solemnly, his eyes shadowed by a weight he couldn't express. "Goodbye, sisters," he said, his voice quiet as he embraced them one by one. Then Karen burst forward, her tears flowing freely as she flung her arms around Elowin. "Please do not leave, Elowin," she cried, clutching her older sister desperately. "Shh, Karen," Elowin soothed, stroking her sister's hair gently. "I promise I will visit you soon." Lana joined their embrace, wrapping her arms around them both. Over Karen's shoulder, Elowin's gaze found their father. She studied his stern, unreadable expression, her brow furrowing as she realized another absence. "Where is Mother?" she asked, her voice tinged with urgency. King Henry's gaze dropped to the ground before meeting hers. "She is still distressed from last evening's events. She will not be joining us." Elowin's eyes glistened as tears threatened to spill. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I must see her. I must say goodbye." Duke Saber stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "There is no time, my dear." Her gaze darted back to her father, silently pleading, but the king remained quiet, his face betraying no emotion. Before the tension could stretch further, Jack grinned, his playful tone breaking through the quiet. "Well, I was going to bid you both farewell, but instead, I have an announcement." "Another announcement?" Karen asked, her tears momentarily forgotten as she pulled away. "Yes," Jack replied, his grin widening. "Out with it, Jack," King Henry demanded, his brow arching impatiently. "I will be joining you on your journey to the Lone Isles." Elowin and Lana's stunned silence quickly gave way to laughter and joy. They threw their arms around each other, their earlier sorrow momentarily replaced with delight. Duke Saber, however, remained still, his eyes fixed on Jack with a measured expression. "We will be glad to have you join us at the Isles," he said, his smile tight and restrained. "I am sure you will," Jack replied, his grin not fading. With goodbyes exchanged and final preparations made, the group turned toward the Changeling. Jack had arranged for his own ship and crew to follow closely on their journey, much to Lana's relief. As the sisters boarded the ship, Elowin glanced back at the dock, her heart heavy as she caught one final glimpse of her family. The ship's moorings were released, and the Changeling glided smoothly away from the harbor. The royal family stood at the edge of the dock, waving as the ship disappeared into the vast expanse of blue. Elowin and Lana remained at the rail, watching their home shrink into the horizon, unsure of when or if they would see it again. King Henry's boots struck the stone floor with a resounding rhythm as he stormed through the corridors, his expression set like carved granite, his thoughts churned, weighed down by the relentless chaos of the past hours. The murder of Seth, the confrontation with Marcus, and the heart-wrenching departure of his daughters. The burden gnawed at him relentlessly. Courtiers and servants lingered in the shadows, their whispers silenced as the king's piercing glare swept past them. Reaching the queen's chambers, Henry flung the door open without pause. Helena sat by the window, her face streaked with tears, startled by his sudden entrance. Her hands trembled as she hastily wiped her cheeks, her red-rimmed eyes locking onto his. "Henry," she rasped, her voice raw from sobbing. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound reverberating like a thunderclap. Henry's sharp eyes scanned the room to ensure they were alone, before turning his stern gaze back to her. "Are you done with your spectacle now?" His voice was sharp, each word laced with barely restrained frustration. "If you mean to ask whether my grief has passed, then no," Helena snapped, rising from her seat with unsteady determination. "It has not." "Well, your grief has borne yet more sorrow," Henry retorted, his tone biting. "Your daughter has left for the Lone Isles." The Queen's knees buckled, and she crumpled to the floor, as though the weight of his words had physically struck her. "Why did no one tell me?" she whispered, her voice breaking as fresh tears spilled down her face. "You knew this was happening, Helena. You knew they were leaving this morning," Henry thundered, his pacing a restless echo of his turbulent emotions. "No! No one told me, Henry!" she wailed, clutching at the hem of her gown as though to anchor herself. "Enough!" Henry barked, his voice reverberating through the chamber. "You missed the chance to bid your newly married daughter farewell, because you let yourself be consumed by the death of a mere criminal. That is your fault, Helena. You can lay the blame with anyone else." Helena raised her tear-streaked face, her grief giving way to fury. "No, Henry, this is your doing. You sent our daughter to that forsaken place. You made this decision without any thought of me. It is you who burdens me with this pain." Henry's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "I made the decision necessary to hold this kingdom together. Do not lay this blame at my feet." "I do blame you, Henry," Helena hissed, venom dripping from her words. "I blame you every single day." Her accusation struck a nerve, and Henry's hand lashed out instinctively. The slap echoed in the still room, and Helena collapsed onto the cold stone floor, her sobs renewed. A heavy silence followed, broken only by her ragged breathing. Henry pressed a hand to the bridge of his nose, his own turmoil apparent. "I did not come here to harm you," he muttered, his voice quieter now, though no less firm. "And yet you have," Helena spat, glaring at him through her tears. "I am sorry," he said, his tone softening but still fraught with frustration. "I do not wish to hurt you, but this madness must end. This very hour, the court whispers that you have gone insane." "Let them whisper!" Helena screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of her anguish. Henry dropped to his knees before her, his gaze desperate as he met her fiery eyes. "Helena, please," he implored. "This marriage has cursed me," she snarled. "The gods themselves conspire against me, and this is their revenge." "Listen to me," Henry commanded, his tone firm as steel. "Speak, then." "I am listening," Helena retorted, her anger unyielding. "I have made a decision," Henry said, his voice low, measured. "You will not like it." Helena let out a bitter laugh. "I am already miserable, Henry. What more could you possibly take from me?" "I'm sending Marcus to the northern border," he said, his gaze fixed on her as though bracing for the storm to follow. Her expression twisted with fury and disbelief. "You take my daughter, you take my seer, and now you send my son away." "It is for the best," Henry replied lowly, rising to his feet and turning to the door. "I pray the gods destroy you as they have me," Helena hissed. Henry ignored her and left the Queen alone in her chambers.